Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we hoped we'd have the news for tonight's game. We don't, but we do think the return is imminent for Khris Middleton. So Camille and I take a look at what his return means to this team on both ends of the floor, the best ways to utilize him, the lift it could give this Bucks team that is suddenly in the thick of it in the Eastern Conference. We get into that discussion coming up next.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. That's right, your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up now for free at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com to start your day with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks brought to you by Built. Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That is joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. Well, Camille, when we last spoke, we had said, hey, signs are pointing towards either Tuesday or Saturday that Khris Middleton is going to be making his, not return, I guess, but season debut here for the Bucks. And unfortunately, that is now Saturday at the earliest, as we learned Monday afternoon. He was ruled out of tonight's game, but suddenly it's a Bucks team that is right back in the thick of things by way of that win streak, if you ask Doc Rivers, 6 of 7 overall. Now just a half game back of the Miami Heat, the team you're playing tonight for 5th in the Eastern Conference and striking distance of the 3 seed in the Orlando Magic. And I think that's one of the more important developments, not necessarily the standings or how far removed you are from these teams, but, a week, 2 weeks ago, some of the conversations we were having about the return of Khris Middleton is, look, this is an unenviable spot for Khris because this team is really struggling and digging out of a hole. And now all of a sudden we're pointing to him as the savior. Well, now, since it is the week of Thanksgiving, you're pointing to Khris Middleton to be the gravy on the mashed potatoes.
That's what you're hoping for. But I've been thinking about Chris's return a lot and what that's going to look like for this team. We heard Doc Rivers during training camp mention how he was holding off on even installing certain sets because he wanted to make sure Khris was going to be out there. He's talked about how Khris is going to open up some different small ball lineups for the Bucks team. And we've seen a few of those, not at the frequency that I think some people would like to see, but we've seen it a bit. And knowing that when Khris comes back is going to unlock some more things for this team. And I've been thinking about what it looks like when he comes back. I'm sure we're not going to have Khris come out here and he's going to be playing 30 minutes a night right away starting. I'm sure it'll be a gradual ramp up for his minutes. But during that time, I do think we might have some moments of clunkiness where before, we were getting used to how this team was starting to play. I think it might take a little bit once he does return to the lineup for them to figure it out because, yes, Khris and Giannis have a history. They know how to play really well with each other. But there's some other new guys on the court, different roles, different scheme offensively a bit as well. So just saying people had been thinking about Khris as a savior for this Bucks team. To your point, now he's more like that gravy on top because things are going well. But I do think that when he comes back, it might be a week or two where it's looking a little off at times because he's trying to get reintegrated into the system and the flow of the game.
So I obviously didn't see the national broadcast with the game going on, but I know that game, there was a report, I guess. Did you catch it from Katie George talking about Khris and his pending return, asking Doc Rivers about it? Doc was asked about it in the following game, but I obviously didn't get a chance to hear what either of the two said.
Yeah, it was just a quick, the Bucks are hopeful that Khris Middleton will return next week, which is now this week. So it wasn't like a big report. It was just kind of like a line that was in the ESPN broadcast really quick.
And so Doc was asked about that and kind of stayed with what we've heard most frequently in that, it's It's getting close. There is no date, but he's getting closer, and joked once again. Look, I know I've said that a lot, and you guys have heard me say that, but it is getting close. The one interesting thing that I think we did hear from him, and I believe this was before the Hornets game that he talked about this, was he has not progressed to 5-on-5 yet, but Doc did say, don't use that as your guide. Like we're not concerned about that. He hasn't done it yet, but I know, early on in the season, we kind of use that as the litmus of he's got to get to doing this. And then once that happens, he's ready to go and he's going to be on the court, but said not concerned about that. Don't use that as your guide. And he's really maintained too, my concern is Khris, not like physically, Khris mentally. And the same applies to Ryan Rollins too, who had his breakout performance, suffered the dislocated shoulder, and has not played since. That's what I'm most concerned about. I think it kind of ties into the previous episode that we had about Doc Rivers and what he's done for this team with just his approach and demeanor. And I know Khris had some personal things that kept him away, not like in a bad way, away from the team for a couple of days there, a week or two ago, that I'm sure may have slowed this down and probably is one of the reasons why we hadn't seen that progress to 5-on-5. But I can attest, I know he has been doing some more things, and I don't know. I hope we're not setting ourselves up for disappointment here, but it really does seem like Saturday is the return date. It's going to come after a decent amount of time off, which doesn't apply to Khris Middleton. The important part of that is the Bucks will be back in Milwaukee. They'll be at home. They have a chance to work on some things, maybe get some 5-on-5 together and run through some things with Khris Middleton. So that is, I think, among the biggest things that leads you to point to Saturday night, his likely or potential return against the Wizards.
Which makes sense because, to your point, this is a Bucks team that's played a lot of games in the month of November. There have not
it's
been
a Heat team that has not played a lot of games tonight.
Good point. Like the break that they're going to have here, playing Tuesday night against the Heat and then not playing again until Saturday. Like, I know the guys have to be excited about that aspect of it because it's been back-to-backs. It's been, was it 4 games and 7 nights? Like, they've been just playing a lot of basketball. So not only does this give the guys who have been playing a chance to kind of get some practice in, get some rest for their body in, but it also gives an opportunity for that 5-on-5 play for Khris Middleton to take place. And again, Doc said, don't look at that as the like you have to have it. But this schedule this week does allow for it, which I think is something positive for Khris Middleton, because we've heard Khris talk before the season started. I don't believe he even thought that this would take this long for him to come back. In the article he had with The Athletic talking to Eric, he mentioned, like, if I don't play, 70 games, like, I feel like I didn't, play a full season. Like, I want to be out there, but I also understand how my body feels. And I always want to make sure that I'm doing what's right for my body. And that's something that he's learned over the last few years of being injured. It's like, this I can play through, but this I need to sit down and let my body recuperate and get ready. Because one thing we don't want for Khris when he does return is for it to be a short return, because he came back too soon. And we talked in the preseason about, like, well, what date is it going to be where it's like, it's been a little too long for Khris being out. And now we're starting to worry. Haven't gotten to that point yet exactly, but it's taken longer than I think anybody thought. So at this point, just make sure that when you do bring him back, it's done in a way where we can try is the key word, to ensure that he'll be able to continue to play. It's not a stop and start type of situation with Khris.
That's the important part. And also how the Bucks may use Khris Middleton, what to expect in this return, which may come Saturday night. We'll get into that conversation and just where this team suddenly finds themselves, some of the things that have gone right for this Bucks team over the past couple of weeks. Camille and I will dig into that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, as the seasons are starting to get a little more dreary, I think we're all looking ahead to the nicer months, the spring, the summer, when you can think about some of those trips you may want to go on, get some warm weather getaways in there. Well, now you can use some points that you earn for travel, points that you earn by things as simple as paying your rent, maybe the biggest expense that you have in your life. You can now turn those into points to reward yourself with Built. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you can earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world that you can redeem your Built points toward. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment and unique experiences that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on rents you're already paying by joining Built. Go to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba to start earning points on your rent payments today. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. So whenever it is, if it's Saturday, if it's next week, we all assume Khris Middleton is going to be on a minutes restriction. And look, he was last year when he came back. It's one of the things that I think gets misrepresented quite a bit of, well, Khris is on a minutes and you can't, rely on him and this and that. Like, one of the things that we talked about was by the time that injury occurred last year in Phoenix, he was consistently up to 30 plus minutes, 35 minutes. He was on pace to play in the high 60s for games in a season. So it was starting to work out. As frustrating as the plan may have been the first couple months of the regular season, you saw it starting to show its fruits down the stretch there. I would assume we're going to get the same thing here. But in the interim, the Bucks have, I think, started to figure out the right mix here. And it's one thing that we heard Doc Rivers very vocal about earlier in the season of the bench struggles, the lineup groupings. Like, we still haven't found it. We're still searching for it. I think you found it in the last couple of weeks. Now, how much of that is due to the opponent? Maybe that's a decent amount of it, but still, I do think a lot of this is transferable. And as we've mentioned, you talk about players like Pat Connaughton, who are suddenly, Doc would push back on saying out of the rotation, but haven't played in 4 straight games. DeLon Wright went a stretch of not playing. They're good problems to have in the interim, that you're not just saying, look, we absolutely need this guy back because we are struggling and we have no one else to turn to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point about the schedule, which I think is important to take a look at, we know during the NBA season that teams don't have a lot of time to practice. We heard it during the championship year of Bud saying, like, some of the things that we're doing is to practice. Like, we just have to get these reps in. And I think that's what's been happening with this Bucks team. So this part of the schedule here where it's softened up, so to speak, after having one of the most difficult starts to the season with that first 10-game slate, is giving them a chance to really continue to work on the game, work on their schemes, work on rotations, and try to figure things out a bit. And that's the part where it's getting interesting, because as we continue through this stretch, we have the Celtics again next week, Friday. Like, this game tonight, even against the Heat, although it's not the Miami Heat team of old where, they're top of the East, this is a Heat team that's going to be playing tonight. That's going to be pretty healthy, almost, I believe, full strength. So with that, it's going to be a difficult game. We know the Bucks tend to struggle sometimes in Miami as well. So you're going to be getting those games. Yes, being nice here this morning. But it's going to be one of those things for this team where you're going to start getting some more of those challenges coming your way. So, like, are you going to be able to apply what you've been able to learn during this last stretch against some better competition as well? Because I don't ever think that going into those games against better comp that the Bucks are going to come out with the wrong effort. That's never been a concern for me, but it's the execution in these games I'm going to be looking forward to. And that's starting tonight, even before the Khris return, just seeing how they play against a team that they have some history with, a player with Jimmy Butler who has given them some fits in the past, and just seeing how they can respond to that. Like, can you start to put some of the lessons that you've been learning over the last week and a half against other teams that have been playing some better ball?
I hate to really sound like a broken record here, but we hear so much discussion about the team that I get it's not everything. How should I put this? Nothing is ever as bad as it looks, and nothing is ever as good as it looks. So, like, as we stressed, it was early in the season. It was not time to panic and say the season is over yet. There was still time to dig out of this hole, or more importantly, stop digging the hole. And that's what we've seen the Bucks do. The defenses look very good. I get the schedule that you point to and the 6-1 record of they're beating up on bad teams. Fine. But as you and I have mentioned, these are teams that the Bucks have struggled with in the past. And I would really push back on that. It's all been tomato cans that the Bucks are beating here during this 7-game stretch that they've run through. I mean, they beat the Houston Rockets, who are the third best team in the Western Conference, and the fifth best team in basketball right now. So they beat that team. They beat the Pacers, who are dealing with struggles. I get they're not the team they were last year, but it's still the team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals a year ago and beat the Bucks 8 times in 11 matchups a season ago. Yeah, so it's a team that has dominated them. The Charlotte Hornets are a team, again, on the outside looking in of the playoff picture, but the Hornets are a team that has given the Bucks problems of late. And defensively, to back up some of those numbers, I mean, the Rockets have been a pretty good offense. Granted, they're getting it done with fast break in transition and offense off of their defense, but they've been a pretty good offense so far this season. Your month of November, which, we've continually pointed to as, hey, look at what the Bucks have done. And by the way, in November, 7-5, a 110.9 defensive rating, which is right in line with the Miami Heat and less than a point per 100 possessions away from the Boston Celtics in all of this month. 9th best defense in the league during the month of November for the Bucks. And I point this out because it includes 4 games, 5 if we want to lump in the Houston Rockets, 5 games against those types of teams, the Rockets, the Knicks, the Cavs, and the Boston Celtics. So, look, you haven't won those games, and that's the next phase. You got to start to beat those teams like the Knicks, the Celtics, and the Cavs. But the defense is held up against very, very good offenses, and the Knicks, Cavs, and Celtics are the 3 best offenses in the league this month, and you've had 4 of your 12 games against a third of your games this month have been against those 3 offenses, and yet your defense is still sitting there at 9th for the month to date. They're also essentially a top 10 team in all 3 of the major categories in the month of November. 11th in offense, 9th in defense, 9th in net rating. Is it realistic to expect that the Bucks are going to be a top 10 defense for the remainder of the year? I'm not willing to automatically write it off. I mean, I suppose I would lean towards probably not. They're probably going to slide somewhere, maybe 12, 13, somewhere around there. But as we discussed earlier in the season, it is what's necessary. Like, if you can be just slightly better than league average defensively and the offense gets to where it needs to go, that's going to be a recipe for success for this team. All the struggles early in the season, like we talked about, it wasn't defense. Right, everything that you hear from national people of defense still can't stop anybody. Perimeter is an issue. I get you don't have the number of perimeter defenders that the Boston Celtics do, but it is much improved over where it was a season ago. The problem was offense. They weren't, executing. They weren't playing to the level that you have of a team that has Giannis and Damian Lillard. We've started to see that come up. You have to assume a Khris Middleton return is going to boost that offense. But the reality is, it's good to see this starting to climb, right around the top 10 for the month of November. they're going to have to be a top 5 offense with what you have defensively. So you've seen some progress. Now you need to see more. And more importantly, you got to start to beat those teams that, we just mentioned. And again, it's kind of the good news, bad news for the Bucks is you got the Miami Heat tonight. Next week, you have the Boston Celtics. You have the Cavs one more time just before Christmas. Outside of that, from here until the end of the calendar year and even the first week into January, you got a couple of games with the Nets. You've got a couple more games with the Bulls. You got 2 with the Wizards on there. You got the Atlanta Hawks on there. The Blazers are on there as well. So it still doesn't start to pick up game after game after game until you really get towards the end of January. And then, of course, it really picks up in March.
It's probably a blessing in disguise for this team as well, thinking about it. Just, again, this was the time of the season so far where this part of the schedule allowed for them to kind of figure things out. If Khris Middleton's return is coming as quickly as we think that it might, with that appearance as soon as possibly Saturday, this is a good stretch of games for him to come in for. Now, again, you're going to have that Celtics game on next Friday, December 6th. So that's going to be a measuring stick game to some degree there. But based on what else that you've mentioned, it's going to be a really good time to reintegrate Khris into the system as they're continuing to get used to him being out there, trying out some different schemes, maybe seeing some more of that small ball configuration there, because you would hate for his return to come if it was like in that March slate that they have, where it's just a crazy slate of games where you're going up against like Dallas or Orlando and Cleveland and the Lakers and the Thunder and then the Lakers and the Warriors. Like that stretch of the season would be a tough time to try to bring somebody back and reintegrate them into what you have going on. But this bodes well, I think, for the Bucks and bringing Khris Middleton back in, where you can't take any team for granted. And as we've talked about in years past, especially last season, this was a team where you could see them go against teams where, oh, this should be an easy Bucks win, and it's not. So they still have to, of course, have the right effort and focus. But I think it's a good slate to try to be bringing somebody back in and get them used to the new system and the new flow of things.
Yeah, there's one more important thing to point out, and I've seen a few people mention it. Van at Brew Hoop did and theirs is more looking at, I think it's like November 5th, somewhere around there, when Andre Jackson Jr. was put into the starting lineup, but what the defense has looked like since then. So by all means, check that out. And he has a thorough breakdown on that. But there's one other interesting defensive number I do want to get into in what's been the new look for this team. So we'll get into that and preview a NBA Cup game, an important one tonight against the Miami Heat, coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Well, maybe you're searching for the perfect pair of underwear and you've gone through several pairs. You find the right one. They go out of business. You don't like the fit. You've tried them all, but now you can end your search with Skims. That's right. Skims is now offering underwear for men. A very exciting story for everybody out there watching this, especially girlfriends that have been able to try out these pairs before. They offer a 5-inch boxer brief, stretch capabilities as well. You can have a cotton boxer brief, 3 inches, a boxer brief stretch of 3 inches as well. The Traveler, many options to choose from, and a great fit. Almost feels like you're wearing nothing down there. Shop Skims Men's at skims.com/lockedonnba. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect holiday gifts for the whole family, Skims just launched their biggest holiday shop ever. Also available at skims.com/lockedonnba. Find your perfect pair now at skims.com/lockedonnba. So that other number I wanted to get to, Camille, is transition. So it was, how would you term it last year? A disaster?
Boo-boo.
Not very good. Not where it needed to be. So for context, last year the Bucks were 26th in terms of frequency of transition possessions. So 5th worst in the league, 5th highest volume of possessions run in transition. The teams that hung around the Bucks Portland Trailblazers, the Lakers, the Memphis Grizzlies, who had the year from hell, the Utah Jazz. That was your neighborhood. The Atlanta Hawks and the Brooklyn Nets were in front of the Bucks. So that's where you were. Now, the interesting part about transition is it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, but it can tell a lot of the story. And what I mean by that, the Timberwolves were 23rd in transition possessions that you gave up. Like, there's something you have to be willing to live with. There are some things, I should say, you have to be willing to live with. And in the case of the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's, look, teams are going to run on us, fine, but we are going to be an elite half-court defense, and that's what they did. So much so that they were the best defense in the league a year ago. The Bucks, 26th in frequency, 26th in efficiency in transition defense a year ago. Since November 1st, since we keep going back to that, they're 28th in frequency, but they are 12th in efficiency. And really the last couple games, they have been elite in limiting points scored in transition. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Like, number one, like we said, you may have to just accept, look, we're an old team. Teams are going to say they can run on us. Fine. They're going to get out and run, but we are going to get back. And I think that's part of what you've seen with the offensive rebounding numbers. Has not been good. Defensive rebounding needs to improve as well, but offensive rebounding, you're sacrificing that and saying teams are going to run. So let's get back and set up our defense. That's what's holding up with this 12th best defensive rating. And in the half court, which, again, the important part, like we just mentioned with the Timberwolves example, if you're going to give up a high volume of plays run in transition and you're going to be somewhere around the middle of the pack, which, 12th isn't middle of the pack. You're knocking on the door top 10. But I think realistically, middle of the pack to lower portion of the middle of the pack is where you can expect the Bucks to sit just because of the volume of attempts opponents are going to get. Well, you better be good in the half court. And they've been 9th best in the half court defensively so far this season, tied with the Boston Celtics in half court defensive rating. So that is the most important thing to look at. And again, it's come against pretty good offenses. I get the win-loss record, but especially the Houston Rockets, you did a really good job in transition defense against them a week, 10 days ago. You're playing tough offenses and the defense is holding up. That, to me, is what gives me the most optimism moving forward. Obviously, seeing Giannis and Damian Lillard, that progression and their chemistry developing, but you got to start winning these games. But defensively, you're holding up against good teams or get offensive units, and in areas the Bucks have struggled for the last year.
Which is a great thing to point out, because we've discussed what the balance of this team needs to be for them to really make a run this year. And we've talked about that offense should be elite. And as you've mentioned, they are figuring things out. But on that defensive end, at worst, be like average. And to hear and see how the numbers are backing up what the eye test has been showing, which is they've been doing better in transition defense and their defense as a whole. It's encouraging to see, because a lot of the pieces on this team are still the same. Yes, Andre Jackson Jr. and AJ Green have been really, really big additions in regards of consistent playing time and what they've been doing defensively. But you still have a lot of the old, quote unquote, slow guys out there. You still have Brook Lopez out there. You still have, Damian Lillard, who's had questions about his defense. And you're seeing that they're figuring it out. And the thing that I kept going back to with them being an older, slower, less athletic team is that if that is the case, then you cannot afford to take plays off. You have to be sharp, play in and play out, because you don't have athleticism to help you out if you get caught in a bad spot. You're going to have to use that IQ, understand where you need to be on the floor, and go from there. So I definitely hear you on that. And those are going to be some stats to keep an eye on going forward for this team, how the transition defense is looking, how the defense is looking. So that's really important. And as they head to Miami, another thing that I'm looking at for them is, can you win on the road? Road wins have been in short supply for the Bucks so far this season. Part of the stretch that we just had here with them getting back on track was with that home heavy schedule. The Bucks are 7-3 at home, 1 of 6 on the road. And that's not a way that you're going to be able to make some noise in the playoffs to get to a high seeding if you're going to be that bad on the road. And again, we know a lot of that's because of that first stretch for this team. It was road heavy then, but now it's time to start digging out of that hole as well and start knocking out some of these wins when you're on the road as well. So Miami's going to be a great test for them tonight for this NBA Cup game, and could be another step in the right direction for them.
Yeah, and to answer some of the questions in the chat, yes, the Rockets have been they were a top 10 offense at the time the Bucks played them. I think they slid a little bit since then, but you can't just view it with individuals and in the half court. They score in transition. That's what makes them a good offense off of their defense. And the Bucks did a good job of limiting that and slowing that down. So you've started to take these steps. The important part is it can't be 2 steps forward, 1 step backward,
right?
Or 1 step forward and 2 steps backward, as we saw most of last year. And boy, Camille, wouldn't you know it, as luck would have it, just as we kind of point that out against the Rockets, I get the email inbox blast from The Athletic, why the Houston Rockets are legit. So it's just stacking that consistency. And it's like we talked about early in the season, you beat Philly and you looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, you felt like, played a good game opening night, and all right, let's build on this. And then you take 2 steps backward with the Bulls.
4 steps back.
Well, yeah, but in the immediacy, 2 steps back with those 2 games that I think we all assumed you beat Philly. All right, 3-0 start to the season. You snap that losing streak, and then more of the same. So now we've started to piece them together. Again, there's going to be more stretches where the Bucks go 1-5 throughout the course of this season, but the important part was to just stop the digging. We've seen Philadelphia still hasn't stopped digging. So you got to stop and get yourself back to that level where you can start to strike now. Like we just went through. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but you have a chance. At the very worst, you're going to finish 500 in the month of November. You have a chance to have a winning record this month, and by way of that, have an overall winning record moving into December. Again, we don't know 2 of the games in December on your schedule because of the NBA Cup, but as we referenced, you got the Pistons on there who've started to cool off a little bit. The Hawks, that's going to be a very interesting game. One more, your final game with the Celtics, another game with the Cavs, but 2 games with the Bulls, the Nets, another one with the Wizards, 2 with the Nets, I should say, the Pacers. Even into January, it doesn't really start to pick up until around the 10th when you got the Magic, the Knicks, the Kings, the Magic on your schedule, Philly a little bit later as well, and then your first West Coast trip of the season. So now is really the time. Like we talked about where you needed to be going into the start of the year, of calendar year, of, man, if they're still like toiling around 500 or slightly below when you get into January, that could be big trouble with the schedule that waits for you in the spring. They've started to course correct that, but you got to piece together another strong month in December, and there's a big opportunity. Look, you could have 2 subpar teams that round out your final 2 games in December. You could have the Celtics or the Cavs, something like that. We don't know yet, and part of that is going to be determined by what happens tonight. So I think we should also point out NBA Cup group play. The Bucks still unbeaten in group play so far. Tonight's game doesn't, I hesitate to say doesn't matter, but tonight's game isn't going to decide anything really, because you can lose this game to the Heat and still win your group if you beat the Pistons next week. It seems like everything is going to come down to Bucks Pistons next Tuesday. Who would have thought? That's the conversation we would have been having about the NBA Cup coming into the season. But the Pistons are still unbeaten. The Bucks are unbeaten. The Heat are 1-1. The Pacers and the Raptors, the other 2 teams, they've both been eliminated. They're not going to get in with 2 losses. So if it's a 3-way tie, which would happen if you lose tonight, beat the Pistons, or if you win tonight, actually no, you lose tonight and beat the Pistons. That's the only scenario where it's a 3-way tie. Then it comes down to point differential, and right now the Bucks are the leaders in point differential. If you win tonight and lose next week, you are not going to, depending on what Detroit does, they would need to lose, and I think it's the Raptors that the Pistons have. They would need to lose that game and have 2 losses. Otherwise, the Pistons would be the representatives for Group B in the NBA Cup. I don't know about you. I love it. I love what the NBA Cup has brought here. My only request for go forward is, can we start to expand this? Like, make this, what would you do, 8 games where you play a home and home against each of those teams? I mean, then it's really starting to drag out, and then it would not be played the finals where they are in December. But that's, I suppose that's kind of what makes it more interesting too, is it's so few games, and you get to 2 losses, you're cooked. We still haven't seen a team with 2 losses. You thought you may see it in some of the Western Conference groups when you looked at, what is it, Group C, that was the group of death. But yeah, can we expand this just a little bit?
Well, I mean, if you expand it too, then I think it pushes it out probably past Christmas as well, which I think is part of the goal of, like, let's get something going before Christmas, which so many people say is the unofficial start of the NBA season. So let's get something.
Well, what about this, Camille? You expand it, and that becomes, I know we're going to see more changes. That just takes place at the All-Star game.
Ooh, no, see, I'm actually a fan of what they're proposing to do for the All-Star game now, with the 3 different All-Star squads, smaller teams. The Rising Stars winner comes in. I love all that. We're getting off topic here. We can talk about all the different rule changes and everything going forward like that for a minute, because I love that All-Star change. But as for the Bucks in Miami, this is a game for the NBA Cup where it's like, yeah, you could lose this one for the Cup and you can still find a way to make your way to Vegas. But for morale for this team, given that it's the Miami Heat as well, a team that they have a history with, getting a win on the road in Miami on top of the NBA Cup would just be beautiful for where this team has been digging themselves out up to get back to 500 against the Heat. Would love that.
And I see a few people pointing out there is 1 wild card in each, 2 wild cards, but it's just 1 per conference. There's a lot of interesting things taking place in Group C, where the Hawks beat the Celtics. So the Hawks, in that sense, control their own destiny. However, they're 2-1. The Celtics are 2-1. The Cavs are 1-1. And the Hawks are behind all of those teams in point. They have a negative point differential despite their 2-1 record here in Cup play. Atlanta does not play tonight. Their final game, and I don't think they play Friday either. Their final game is next Tuesday, which is the final night of NBA Cup group play. You have the notable games. There's no real notable games for the Bucks to keep an eye on tonight. This is it. The Bulls, Wizards,
take care of business.
Doesn't matter to the Bucks, and the other ones are Western Conference games. But Friday, the Hawks, I misspoke. The Hawks do play Friday. That's their final game. They host the Cavs. So if the Hawks win that game, the Hawks are winning Group C.
Yeah.
They would be 3-1. They've beaten the Celtics and Cavs. So that is maybe the marquee game of the night on Friday. The Knicks play the Hornets. The Knicks and Magic are both 2-0. The Bucks and Pistons are both 2-0. So depending on what happens in Group C, if the Hawks win that, it may be very tough to get the wild card because of the Magic and the Knicks both being unbeaten. The Magic have a higher point differential than the Bucks. If you lose a game, your point differential is going to take a step backward. That's why not getting blown out is very important in these games. The Celtics are 12 points behind the Bucks in point differential. They played 1 game more, but it's not, out of the realm of possibilities. They play the Bulls, by the way, for the Celtics to win that game by 30. So I think it's going to be tough to get the wild card just based on what we've seen in Group C and the fact that the Magic and Knicks are both unbeaten so far. And just to take a quick peek at what we've got for the final night of group play, you have the Magic and Knicks playing each other, which may determine it's going to determine who wins that group.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I love the NBA Cup that they brought this in, second year of it, getting used to it still and understanding how everything works. I know those who watch soccer, football, are probably more familiar with the concept of how all the group play works and the point system. And it's something that NBA fans have been learning. And I think it's something that should stick around for a long time. I know I enjoy it. I hope that other NBA fans enjoy it as well, because I do feel like the product on the court during the NBA Cup games is a bit better better than a normal regular season game as well.
Yeah, if you lose tonight, I don't think you can get the wild card unless you absolutely, well, it wouldn't matter then if you blow out the Pistons, but then you would win your group. So I wouldn't bank on the wild card if I were a Bucks fan looking ahead to the knockout round of the NBA Cup. But we'll have a better answer after tonight when we know where the Bucks sit after 3 games and if the Miami Heat have been eliminated. And it's just going to come down to the Bucks and the Pistons in Detroit. And we'll preview this in much more length next week, Camille, but that's going to be tough if it comes down to that. If the Bucks win tonight, the Pistons win their next game as well, and it's 2 3-0 teams, that is going to be like a playoff team. And I'm very playoff game, and I'm very curious to see what the crowd is going to be in Detroit for a team that is starved.
They're going to be ready
for winning and a chance to advance to the final 8 in this NBA Cup. Going to be very, very interesting to see. But we'll have a better idea after tonight, the Bucks and the Miami Heat. That's a 6:30 tip. And if you're interested, I think it's a 6:35 tip-off. So pretty close to the tip time there. Frank and I are going to handle the post-game on tonight's show. And hopefully we're talking about another win, 7 of their last 8, and a 3-0 start to group play for the Milwaukee Bucks. For Camille, I'm Justin. That'll do it for today's show. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.